I could smell the expensive perfume from across the courtroom. It was the kind that cost more than most people's rent, and she wore it like armor. You think you know how this ends? Keep watching, because what I did next will shock you. It was a Tuesday morning in March when I saw the name on my docket that made me pause. Madison Rivera, age 24, charged with reckless driving, going 78 miles per hour in a 35 zone through a school district at 3:15 in the afternoon. I remember looking at that timestamp and feeling my jaw tighten. 3:15, right when kids were getting out of school. I've learned to read people the moment they walk through my courtroom doors. It's not something they teach you in law school. It comes from years of watching human nature play out in front of you. When Madison Rivera walked in that morning, everything about her screamed entitlement. She wore a cream-colored Chanel suit that probably cost $4,000. Her shoes were Louboutin. I know because my daughter once showed me a pair in a magazine and told me they cost $1,200. The bag she carried was Hermes. I recognized the orange box logo from when my wife and I walked past the store in Boston. But what struck me most was her face. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't apologetic. She looked annoyed, like being in my courtroom was an inconvenience to her Tuesday schedule. She sat down at the defendant's table and immediately pulled out her phone. I watched her start scrolling through it while my clerk was still reading the charges. The citation came from Officer Daniel Martinez, badge number 4721. He'd been a police officer for 11 years. I'd seen him testify in my courtroom at least 30 times. He was thorough, honest, and professional. When I looked at his report, every detail was documented precisely. The incident occurred on Riverside Avenue on March 7th at 3:14 p.m. His radar gun clocked her at 78 miles per hour. The speed limit was clearly posted at 35.
Buckle up, guys. Today we're going to witness how arrogance walked into a courtroom, wearing designer labels, and walked out facing consequences. The case begins with a 24-year-old clocked at 78 in a 35 miles per hour school zone at dismissal time. From the moment she enters, dressed in luxury and dripping with attitude, it's clear this won't be an ordinary traffic hearing.
It was a school zone. Washington Elementary School dismisses at 3:10 p.m. What caught my attention next was a note Officer Martinez had added at the bottom of his report. It said, "Defendant became belligerent when stopped, refused to provide license and registration, stated her father was Police Chief Joseph Rivera and that I would regret this citation, had to ask for documents 4 times before she complied." I looked up from the report and studied Madison. She was still on her phone. I cleared my throat. She didn't look up. I said her name. Nothing. Finally, I raised my voice. "Ms. Rivera, put the phone away and stand up." She looked at me with genuine surprise, like she couldn't believe I was speaking to her that way. She slowly stood up but kept the phone in her hand. I told her to put it in her bag. She rolled her eyes at me, in my courtroom. I asked her if she understood why she was here. She shrugged and said, "Some cop had a bad day and decided to take it out on me." I felt my blood pressure start to rise. I've dealt with arrogance before, but this was something different. This was someone who genuinely believed the rules didn't apply to her. I explained the charges to her clearly. Reckless driving, 78 in a 35, school zone. She could have killed a child. Do you know what she said to me? She laughed. She actually laughed and said, "But I didn't, so what's the big deal?" That's when I knew this wasn't going to be a simple traffic case. I asked her if she had anything to say in her defense. She told me she was late for a hair appointment. A hair appointment. That was her justification for going more than double the speed limit through a school zone. I've been doing this job long enough to know when someone needs a reality check. I started explaining to her what could have happened. A child could have run into the street. A parent could have been crossing with a stroller. At 78 miles per hour, she wouldn't have been able to stop in time. Someone could be dead right now because she was late for a hair appointment. She cut me off mid-sentence. She looked me dead in the eye and said, "Are you done lecturing me? My dad is the police chief. Just call him and we can clear this up." I felt something snap inside me. Not anger exactly, more like a cold clarity. I've seen entitled people before. I've seen people try to use connections to get out of trouble. But the sheer audacity...
The defendant shows open disrespect, scrolling on her phone, rolling her eyes, laughing at the idea she could have killed a child. When questioned, she shrugs it off as an inconvenience caused by a cop having a bad day. Then she drops the first bombshell. Her father is the police chief, and this will all go away. The entitlement isn't subtle, it's weaponized.
The city of this young woman was breathtaking. She genuinely believed that her father's position put her above the law. I told her that her father's job had nothing to do with her case. She was in my courtroom now, and everyone is equal here. She smirked at me. Actually smirked. Then she said something that I still can't believe. She said, "Whatever, old man, just find me whatever, and I'll be out of here." Before I tell you what I decided to do, hit that subscribe button if you believe in real justice. The prosecutor, Linda Chen, had been sitting quietly during this exchange. I saw her stand up and ask to approach the bench. I motioned her forward. She leaned in and whispered, "Your Honor, there's more to this case. Can we take a 5-minute recess?" I agreed. I told Madison to sit down and wait. She huffed and pulled out her phone again. I went back to my chambers with Linda following me. She closed the door and handed me her own phone. She said, "You need to see this." I looked at the screen. It was Instagram, Madison Rivera's Instagram account. She had 53,000 followers. The account was public. Linda scrolled to a post from March 7th, the same day as the citation. The timestamp said 3:45 p.m., just 30 minutes after Officer Martinez had pulled her over. The post was a selfie of Madison in her car. The caption read, "Just got pulled over by the cutest cop, LOL. Too bad he was such a jerk about it. Don't worry, Daddy will make this go away. Police chief's daughter, above the law. Sorry, not sorry." I stared at that screen. I read the caption 3 times to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding. She had actually posted this, publicly, with hashtags bragging about being above the law. I scrolled through the comments. There were over 2,000 of them.
During a recess, the prosecutor reveals explosive evidence. Public Instagram posts made minutes after the stop. In them, the defendant brags that her daddy will make the ticket disappear and mocks the officer. A second video shows her laughing about the danger she caused. What seemed like arrogance now looks like a pattern of protected misconduct.
Most were from her followers encouraging her, saying things like, "Use those connections, girl," and "perks of having a cop dad." But then Linda scrolled further. She showed me another post from that same evening. This one was a video. Madison was at some restaurant, clearly having drinks with friends. She was laughing and telling the story of getting pulled over. I could hear her voice clearly. She said, "And then this old cop got all serious and was like, 'Do you know you could have killed someone?' And I was like, 'But I didn't though.' It was so dramatic." Her friends were laughing. Someone off camera said, "Are you going to get in trouble?" Madison took a sip of her drink and said, "Please, my dad runs the police department. This will disappear by tomorrow." I handed the phone back to Linda. I asked her how she found this. She told me that Officer Martinez's daughter was in high school with some of Madison's Instagram followers. The daughter saw the posts and told her father. Officer Martinez had contacted Linda that morning with screenshots in case they were needed. I sat down at my desk. I needed a minute to process this. It wasn't just the reckless driving anymore. It was the attitude, the complete lack of remorse, the public bragging about using her father's position to avoid consequences. And something else was bothering me. I asked Linda if she had looked into whether Police Chief Rivera had actually interfered with any citations before. Linda nodded slowly. She told me that she'd made some calls that morning after seeing the Instagram posts. She'd spoken to 3 different officers who worked under Chief Rivera. All 3, speaking confidentially, confirmed that the chief had made at least 5 traffic citations involving his daughter disappear over the past 2 years. The officers had been told to drop them, to make them go away. One officer said he'd been threatened with bad assignments if he didn't comply. I felt sick. This wasn't just a spoiled young woman. This was corruption. This was a police chief abusing his position to protect his daughter from the consequences of dangerous behavior. And she'd been doing this for years. How many times had she driven recklessly? How many times had she endangered lives? How lucky had we been that she hadn't actually killed someone?
Behind closed doors, more disturbing details surface. Multiple officers confidentially confirm the police chief has erased at least 5 prior citations for his daughter. Threats, pressure, intimidation. It points to systemic abuse of power. The judge contacts State Police Internal Affairs, setting in motion an investigation that could shake the department's leadership.
One yet. I stood up and told Linda I needed to make a phone call. She asked who I was calling. I said the one person who could help me handle this properly. I picked up my desk phone and dialed a number I'd had to use only twice before in my career. The number for the State Police Internal Affairs Division. A detective named Sarah Walsh answered. I explained the situation to her. The reckless driving, the Instagram posts, the allegations of Chief Rivera making citations disappear. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Judge Caprio, we've actually had Chief Rivera on our radar for a few months now. We've heard rumors but haven't had enough evidence to open a formal investigation. What you're telling me might be exactly what we need. I told her I had screenshots, witness statements from officers, and a defendant currently sitting in my courtroom who had publicly bragged about being above the law. Detective Walsh said she could be at the courthouse in 40 minutes. I told her to come to my chambers and to bring whatever documentation she needed. I hung up and looked at Linda. I told her we were going back into the courtroom, but we weren't going to proceed with the case yet. I was going to continue it for 2 hours. She looked confused but nodded. We walked back out together. Madison was still on her phone when I sat back down at the bench. I banged my gavel to get her attention. She looked up, irritated. I told her that due to some new information that had come to my attention, I was continuing her case until 1 p.m. She started to protest. I cut her off. I told her she had 2 choices. She could sit in my courtroom and wait, or she could go get lunch and be back by 1 p.m. sharp. If she wasn't in her seat at 1 p.m., I would issue a bench warrant for her arrest. She stood up and said, "This is ridiculous. You can't just make me wait around all day." I looked at her and said,
Court resumes with a twist. The defendant returns flanked by a high-profile attorney and her furious father in uniform. The chief attempts to speak, but is shut down. The attorney moves to dismiss, claiming procedural flaws, but the arguments collapse under scrutiny. The courtroom atmosphere tightens. This is no longer just about speeding.
"Ms. Rivera, I can and I am. You're dismissed until 1 p.m. She grabbed her bag and stormed out of the courtroom. I watched her go and wondered if she had any idea what was coming. Now here's the part that went viral. But first, drop a comment and tell me what would you have done in my position. The next 2 hours were some of the longest of my career. Detective Walsh arrived with a partner, Detective Marcus Johnson. They brought files. Lots of files. They'd apparently been building a case against Chief Rivera for 3 months. They had testimony from 8 different officers about citations that had been made to disappear. They had financial records showing that the chief had used department funds for personal expenses. They had everything except one thing, proof that the chief had explicitly instructed officers to destroy traffic citations for his daughter. The Instagram posts changed everything. They were Madison's own words admitting that her father made her legal problems go away. Combined with the officer's testimony, it was enough to open a formal investigation. But Detective Walsh wanted more. She wanted to see how this played out in court. She wanted to see if Madison would continue to incriminate herself and her father. I understood what she was asking. She wanted me to push Madison, to create a situation where Madison might say more than she should. It was risky, but if it led to stopping corruption in our police department, it was worth it. At 12:55 p.m., Madison walked back into my courtroom.
The judge pivots sharply, questioning the defendant about social media. She hesitates, her lawyer uneasy. Then the posts appear on the courtroom screen. Selfie, captions, hashtags boasting she's above the law. Silence floods the room. The confident smirk vanishes. For the first time, the reality of public evidence lands hard.
She had 2 people with her now. A man in an expensive suit who I assume was a lawyer, and an older man in a police chief's uniform. Joseph Rivera. He looked angry. His face was red and his jaw was clenched. They all sat down at the defendant's table. I banged my gavel at exactly 1 p.m. Before I could say anything, Chief Rivera stood up. He said, Your Honor, I'm Police Chief Joseph Rivera. I'm here to speak on my daughter's behalf. I looked at him calmly. I said, Chief Rivera, unless you're a lawyer, you have no standing in this courtroom. Sit down. His face got redder, but he sat. The lawyer stood up next. He introduced himself as Robert Kensington from some big downtown firm. He said he was representing Ms. Rivera and would like to enter a plea of not guilty. He requested that the case be dismissed due to lack of evidence and improper procedure. I asked him what improper procedure he was referring to. He started talking about how Officer Martinez had violated his client's rights by prolonging the traffic stop, how the radar gun hadn't been properly calibrated, how the school zone signs weren't clearly visible. It was all nonsense, and we both knew it. I let him finish his little speech. Then I said, Counselor, I've reviewed Officer Martinez's report thoroughly. Everything was done by the book. The radar gun was calibrated that morning. The school zone signs are clearly posted and meet all state requirements. Your motion to dismiss is denied. Mr. Kensington looked shocked. He clearly wasn't used to judges denying his motions. He tried again. He said that his
Pressed under oath, she admits the posts are hers. When asked what she meant about her father making tickets disappear, she falters. Her attorney urges silence, but the damage is unfolding live. What started as bravado turns into confession. The illusion of untouchability begins to fracture in front of everyone watching.
client was a young woman of good character who had simply made a minor mistake. He wanted the court to consider reducing the charges to a simple speeding ticket with a small fine. That's when I decided it was time. I looked at Madison and said, Ms. Rivera, I'd like to ask you some questions. You have the right to remain silent, but I think it would be in your interest to answer honestly. She glanced at her lawyer. He nodded reluctantly. She looked back at me and said, Fine. What? I asked her if she had any social media accounts. She said yes. I asked her if she posted about this traffic stop on social media. Her eyes widened slightly. Her lawyer leaned over to whisper something to her, but she ignored him. She said, Maybe. I don't remember everything I post. I nodded. I asked my clerk to pull up the Instagram posts on the courtroom monitor. Within seconds, Madison's posts appeared on the large screen behind me. The selfie, the caption about her dad making it go away, the hashtags about being above the law. The courtroom went completely silent. I watched Madison's face drain of color. Her lawyer put his head in his hands. Chief Rivera stood up and started to say something, but I pointed at him and said, Chief Rivera, sit down and be quiet, or I will have you removed from my courtroom. He sat down, but he looked.
The breakthrough comes quietly but decisively. She admits citations had, in fact, gone away before, at least 5 or 6 times. Tears replace arrogance. The courtroom shifts from spectacle to reckoning. This is no longer about a single reckless drive. It's about years of immunity granted by influence.
Like he wanted to explode. I turned back to Madison. I asked her if those were her posts. She nodded weakly. I asked her to speak up for the record. She said, yes. I asked her what she meant when she wrote that her daddy would make this go away. She didn't answer. I asked again. Her lawyer told her not to answer. I looked at Mr. Kensington and said, Counselor, your client just admitted under oath that these are her posts. They're already public. She's going to answer the question. Madison finally spoke. She said quietly, My dad has helped me with tickets before, that's all. I leaned forward. I asked her how many times. She said she didn't know, maybe a few times. I asked her what helped meant. Did it mean he paid the fines? Or did it mean the citations disappeared? If you're still with me, you're part of something special. Like this video and let's show everyone.
Attention turns to the police chief. Detectives from Internal Affairs sit in the gallery as he's confronted directly. Asked whether he abused his authority, he requests a lawyer. Moments later, a detective formally announces a corruption investigation. The power dynamic flips instantly. The once dominant chief now stands exposed.
Everyone that justice matters. Her lawyer was practically begging her to stop talking now, but something had broken in Madison. Maybe it was seeing her own words on that big screen. Maybe it was the reality of the situation finally hitting her. She said, The citations went away. He talked to the officers who wrote them. I asked her how many times this had happened. She said at least 5 or 6 that she could remember. I asked her if she thought that was appropriate, if she thought it was fair that she got away with breaking the law while other people had to face consequences. She started crying. Real tears this time, not crocodile tears. She said, "I didn't think it was a big deal. It was just speeding tickets." I sat back in my chair. I looked at this young woman who had walked.
The judge addresses the defendant with controlled force. He outlines the real danger she posed. The children, the families, the lives that could have been shattered. Her social media arrogance is called out as evidence of deeper character flaws. The lecture is not theatrical. It's deliberate, pointed, and impossible to ignore.
Into my courtroom 5 hours ago full of arrogance and entitlement. Now she was crying and finally, maybe for the first time in her life, understanding that actions have consequences. But I wasn't done. I looked at Chief Rivera. I said, "Chief Rivera, I'm going to ask you some questions now. You're not under oath, but I want you to know that there are people in this courtroom who are very interested in your answers." I motioned to the back of the courtroom. Detective Walsh and Detective Johnson were sitting in the last row. I watched Chief Rivera's eyes find them. I watched him recognize them. I watched the blood drain from his face just like it had from his daughter's. I asked him directly, "Did you use your position as police chief to make traffic citations against your daughter disappear?" He looked at his daughter. He looked at...
Sentence is delivered. Guilty of reckless driving, $5,000 fine, 1-year license suspension, and 100 hours of community service at the very school she endangered. She must publicly apologize and remove her posts. The message is clear. Privilege does not cancel accountability, and public disrespect carries public consequences.
The detectives. He looked back at me. I could see him weighing his options. Finally, he said, "I want to speak to a lawyer." I nodded. I said, "That's your right, Chief. But I want you to understand something. Your daughter just admitted under oath that you made at least 5 or 6 citations disappear. We have testimony from multiple officers confirming this. We have your daughter's own social media posts bragging about it. The time for lawyers and denials is over." Detective Walsh stood up from the back of the courtroom. She walked down the aisle and stopped in front of Chief Rivera. She said, "Chief Joseph Rivera, I'm Detective Sarah Walsh with the State Police Internal Affairs Division. We're opening a formal investigation into allegations of corruption and abuse of power. You'll be hearing from us very soon." Chief Rivera's face went from red to white to red again. He started to say something, but Detective Walsh held up her hand. She said, "Don't make this worse, Chief. Just don't." The courtroom was so quiet I could hear the air conditioning. Everyone was watching this unfold. This wasn't just a traffic case anymore. This was a corruption case being cracked open right in front of everyone. I turned back to Madison. I told her to stand up. She did, shakily. Her lawyer stood with her.
The judge goes further, speaking about responsibility and leadership. He tells the chief he failed both his daughter and his department by shielding her from consequences. The courtroom absorbs the gravity of that statement. What began as a traffic case has transformed into a lesson on integrity and equal justice.
I looked at her, and I said what I'd been planning to say since I saw those Instagram posts. I told her that she was young and privileged and had been protected from consequences her entire life. I told her that her behavior wasn't just wrong, it was dangerous. She could have killed someone, multiple times. She'd been speeding recklessly for years and getting away with it because of who her father was. Eventually her luck would have run out. Eventually she would have hit someone, a child, a parent, a grandparent. Someone would have died because she was late for a hair appointment or a brunch or whatever trivial thing seemed important to her at the moment. I told her that her social media posts showed a complete lack of character and judgment. She had publicly bragged about being above the law. She had mocked the officer who had been doing his job. She had shown contempt for the legal system and for the safety of her community. Then I told her what I was going to do about it. I found her guilty of reckless driving. I fined her $5,000. I suspended her driver's license for 1 year. I sentenced her to 100 hours of community service, which she would complete at Washington Elementary School, the school zone where she'd been caught speeding. She would help with traffic safety. She would watch parents drop off their kids. She would see the children whose lives she'd endangered. But I wasn't done. I also ordered her to take down all of her social media posts about this case and to post a public apology. A real apology, not some half-hearted PR statement. She would apologize to Officer Martinez. She would apologize to the community.
After adjournment, the impact ripples outward. Internal Affairs confirms the case against the chief is strengthened. The officer who wrote the ticket is reportedly in tears, vindicated after weeks of harassment. The judge reflects privately on the unseen child, who made it home safely because someone enforced the law.
She would acknowledge what she'd done wrong and commit to doing better. And finally, I told her that if she ever appeared in my courtroom again for anything remotely similar, I would sentence her to the maximum penalty allowed by law, which for reckless driving could include jail time. I watched her face as I laid out the sentence. The tears were flowing freely now. The arrogance was completely gone. She nodded and whispered, "Yes, Your Honor." I looked at her lawyer. I asked him if he had anything to add. He shook his head. He knew better than to argue. This could have been so much worse for his client. Then I did something I rarely do. I spoke directly from my heart. I told Madison that I believed people could change. I believed that this could be a turning point for her. She was 24 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She could choose to learn from this and become a better person, or she could continue down the path she'd been on and eventually face much worse consequences. I told her that privilege is a responsibility, not a shield. People who have advantages in life have an obligation to use those advantages to help others, not to put themselves above the rules that everyone else has to follow. Her father's position should have made her more aware of the law, more respectful of it, not less. I looked at Chief Rivera. I told him that he had failed his daughter. By protecting her from consequences, he hadn't helped her. He'd hurt her. He'd taught her that rules didn't matter, that people were divided into those who had to follow the law.
The story goes viral. Public reaction floods in praise, criticism, debate. Meanwhile, the defendant completes her service and posts a sincere apology. The chief resigns and strikes a deal to avoid criminal charges. Department policies are reformed. The officer who stood firm earns a promotion.
And those who didn't. That was the opposite of what a police chief should teach anyone, especially his own child. I told him that he had also failed his community and his department. The officers who worked under him deserved a leader with integrity, a leader who upheld the law, not someone who bent it for personal benefit. Whatever happened with the internal affairs investigation, he needed to think long and hard about what kind of example he'd been setting. The courtroom was absolutely silent. I could see some people in the gallery nodding. I could see others wiping their eyes. This had turned into something bigger than a traffic case. It had become a lesson about justice and accountability and the importance of equal treatment under the law. I banged my gavel and said, "This court is adjourned." I stood up and walked back to my chambers. As I closed the door behind me, I could hear the explosion of conversation starting in the courtroom. People were talking, phones were coming out, the story was already starting to spread. Detective Walsh came to my chambers about 20 minutes later. She thanked me. She said that what happened in the courtroom had given them everything they needed to move forward with their investigation. Chief Rivera was likely going to be suspended pending the outcome. There might be criminal charges depending on what else they found. She also told me something interesting. Officer Martinez, the cop who had written the original citation, had been outside the courtroom during the proceedings. He'd heard everything. He was apparently in tears. He'd been harassed by Chief Rivera for weeks after writing that.
In the final reflection, the focus shifts to principle over spectacle. Justice, the judge explains, is about equal treatment under the law. No exceptions for wealth, status, or connections. Whether the defendant truly changed remains uncertain, but the standard was set publicly and unmistakably. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.